Welcome to the first episode of the Northern Art Podcast. My name is Ant Cosgrove. I'm from North Manchester. I run a Facebook page called the Northern Art Page, which I set up in 2011 in response to the resurgent art scene in the Northwest at that time. The page has grown organically since then, and I've met various people associated with art, artists, curators, collectors, people just generally interested in art. I've also been involved in exhibitions. I've put on exhibitions. I've written guides. I've opened exhibitions. So it's been a nice period. I came up with the idea of launching my own podcast about a year ago. I became quite a fan of the Talk Art podcast, which is run by a couple of guys, Robert Diamond and the actor Russell Tover. Their podcast features various high-profile guests, contemporary artists, curators, etc. And I really like the idea of that. Talk Art is quite London-based and focuses mainly on contemporary artists. I wanted to create a podcast that gives a different view of the art world, looking at it from a different angle, really. That's not to say that I won't be looking into London and looking at artists and exhibitions and things that have gone on in London or around the world or whatever. But I don't want to shy away as well from talking about the work that has been produced in the North in the past and currently is being produced in the North or elsewhere, really. Just sort of, I think by Northern Art Podcast, it's probably more me being from the North, I think. I think that's what it'll probably end up referring to. So I have a very good guest lined up for my first podcast. This is a guy that I've known for a few years now. Actually knew of him before I knew him personally. He's a prolific writer, has written probably in excess of 25 books, mainly on modern British painting and sculpture, quite associated with St Ives and also various artists throughout the country as well. He's an artist in his own right. He's a printmaker. He's especially well known in the Northwest because of a particular book, which we'll be going to be talking about today. This book was published in the 80s. It's called A Northern School. It's sometimes heralded as the Bible of Northern Art. It's a book that, like I say, we're going to be discussing it today. And may I introduce you to Mr. Peter Davies. Hello, Peter.
Hi, Ant.
You okay?
Yeah, fine. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, nice to talk to you, mate. It's quite a nice evening here. It's been a nice couple of weeks weather-wise, but very strange sort of situation at the moment in the world.
Well, quite.
We won't go into that too much at the moment. Right. So,
quite.
So, Peter, your background, you're born in Pontypool, is that right, in Wales?
Yeah, South Wales, yeah.
South Wales. Do you want to give a brief biography of yourself, if that's okay?
Yeah, I'm a Taff, yeah.
You're a Taff, okay. Yeah. You don't sound like it.
Well, I kind of left Wales, I suppose, when I was, when I was kind of late teenager.
Right, okay.
I went over to Norwich to study at the University of East Anglia.
Right, okay, cool, yeah. That's what you do.
I studied art history, so that's what, opened the doors to me, for me to, to go into art.
Yes. Did you organise exhibitions or something at one point as well, I think?
Yes, I did. I mean, I sort of did what you were doing, really. I started organising exhibitions, and I was like a flea in the ointment where the Arts Council were concerned, because I was kind of sticking my nose into areas and organising shows that the Arts Council might have been organising, but anyway, I organised a few.
That's how you met a lot of people, I guess, at that point. You met
late 70s, early 80s and stuff.
Right, okay. And then you went into writing then?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I wanted to write. I mean, I always wanted to write, really. Because when I was doing essays at UEA in Norwich, I got into the hang of writing on art, obviously. Yeah. And, I sort of felt I had a journalistic ability, which I can remember my dad remarking on when I was very, very young. So I suppose I had the gift of the gab with regard to simple journalism and stuff. And obviously, the more I became familiar with art history as a discipline, which, as I say, I was introduced to when I was a student in Norwich, and then it was an inspiration for me to meet real artists, rather than just study them in books. I mean, once I started to meet well-known artists or even famous ones, it was like a bit of a sort of thrill, really. It was a turn on, I don't know, it's almost like kind of the glamour of showbiz, the glamour of, of Hollywood or something, as we say, but allied to a kind of heady kind of intellectualism. When I started to go to private views for the first time at exhibition openings, I found it initially so heady and kind of intense, intellectually intense, and yet it also had this kind of almost show busy glamour as well.
So
that was a bit of a turn on to begin with.
And then what we could discuss so many different sort of things with you, Peter, of course, because you've written so extensively.
Yeah.
We are going to concentrate today on one book in particular, which you are very, you are well known for, particularly in the Northwest. Whenever you go to sort of an exhibition at one of the Northern Galleries and Peter's there, he's you're a bit of a celeb in your own right, I think, because a lot of people sort of do approach you with regards to the Northern School book. So we're going to discuss that today, and we know it was published, or I know rather, it was published in 1989 for the first time. So what was the sort of build up to that? How did it sort of come into fruition, please?
Well, I mean, you're quite right. I mean, it is my most important book, really. It's the book I'm supposed to be best remembered for, because apart from anything else, it went into a deluxe, coffee table second edition, and it broke new ground on a subject that's very, very important. It was an unturned stone in modern British art. I mean, Michael Howard, one of my colleagues in this area of the Northern School, he talked to me not so long ago about the art boom, the great big boom in British art since, since the early 70s, mid-70s. Yeah. And British art suddenly started to become really popular, not just among the British, but among, art lovers in other countries. In other words, British art started to take on an international perspective. Yeah. And so this big art boom, and of course the Northern School was an untouched stone in that sort of burgeoning modern British story. Yeah, of course. I mean, obviously Lowry was a household name, a very ultra-famous name, Ellis Lowry, a legend. Mm-hmm. But around him, there was this great big school of followers and younger artists or even contemporary artists that didn't become as well known as Lowry. Yes, of course. And it hadn't been covered by anybody, so it was like a golden opportunity for me. It was just a gift horse for me. I mean, I hadn't lived up north ever, but...
was it Valerie Lowndes, I think, you sort of... did you know her, I think, initially?
Yeah, I mean, the painter Alan Lowndes' widow, Valerie, she became a very good friend of mine. Yeah. I first met her in about 1983, early 80s, because she lived north of Bristol, where I was then living, and I went to see her, and then we became very good friends. And it was really through wanting to write specifically on Alan Lowndes. But it wasn't just the Northern School connection with Alan Lowndes. Yeah. It was also the St. Ives connection.
Of course, yeah. And Fred Yates is the other one, isn't it? I think people sort of is quite...
Well, Fred Yates, it's the same. He kind of straddled both St. Ives and, his native north.
Of course, yeah.
They both came from Stockport, but they both drifted down to St. Ives.
Yeah, and Bob Crosley's another one, isn't he? I think he's another one.
Well, Bob Crosley's another. There's a whole bunch of them actually. Yeah. That went down to St. Ives. So my first involvement in art was actually St. Ives.
Right. Okay.
And then through Valerie Lowndes, who I got to know through St. Ives, as I say. Yeah. I then started to look in on the Northern School.
That's interesting, right? So that's how it slips up from St. Ives up north via sort of what Alan Lowndes had done earlier in his life. That's interesting, right? Okay.
Exactly. And then through Valerie, she opened doors, and I met John Willett, the critic, who was a close personal friend of Lowndes, and they used to go and spend holidays with John Willett.
Yeah, he was an interesting guy. Was he a journalist, I think, or something? Was he, John?
No, he was a journalist. He wrote for the Manchester Guardian.
That's right. And he published a book in the 60s, about 1967, which I've got a copy of, Art in the City. Which is obviously to do with the Liverpool sort of side of it, which I know we will touch on a bit later. But so obviously you knew him, did you, as well?
Well, I knew him. I had supper with him in Hampstead, where he lived, because I lived in London in the mid-80s, and I went and had supper with him in Hampstead, and, he started to tell me all sorts of things about X, Y, and Z. He talked about Theodore Major and, Nicholas Horsfield, who was another close friend of John Willett.
All right.
And of course, Willett had been the art critic for the Manchester Guardian. So he was reviewing shows in Manchester and Liverpool.
Right, okay.
So he was walking the ground at that time. He knew everybody.
Yeah.
And of course, through John Willett, I then went to meet Nicholas Horsfield.
A terrific painter, really.
You know, a terrific painter.
I've got I've got about a dozen of his work. I love Nicholas.
Well, he's a very good painter. I mean, excellent painter. You know, and you know, he lived near Southport, and I used to stay near Southport in Skelmersdale.
Right, okay.
Because my meditation friend Ambrose from Devon, he came up to live in Skelmersdale, and then I used to stay with him as an old friend. And
so it's like this sort of web of like this network sort of grew up, didn't it? Sort of around, you know, with sort of it works quite well, didn't it, with the book? You know,
well, just one thing led to another.
Yeah,
I mean, Theodore Major lived 3 miles away in Apley Bridge.
Right.
I mean, I could practically walk to Theodore Major from Skelmersdale.
Right, okay.
And then I went to see Nicholas Horsfield in Southport, a bus ride away.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're just completely wonderful. They were very helpful. They really spent, you know, a lot of time talking to me about the art scene in the old days. And it was just fabulous. You know, it was just wonderful indoctrination into it all.
Fantastic.
You know, it was just great. But one thing led to another. It does in art.
Yeah.
You know, you meet one person and then you meet somebody else through them, and then it's like a chain reaction.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, it was fantastic, it was. But it was a gift horse because it hadn't been touched all of this territory.
People have only talked about, I mean, your book, I think it's sort of purposely, Lowry's there, he's quite present in the book, but he's not the whole stream of the book. You know, he's touched on a little bit, but you accept that there's so much already written about Lowry. You'd just be retouching this, what's already been said, wouldn't you, probably?
Well, he sees his ghost, doesn't he?
Yes, of course.
I mean, he sees his ghost.
Yeah,
I mean, the reason I didn't write on Lowry per se is that he was so all-pervading, his inspiration and influence, that I felt he could just be treated, you know, as part of the DNA, if you like.
Yeah.
You know, and I decided not to do a separate study on Lowry within the group book because so much had been written on him already.
Perfect. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, that's what I thought when I read the book. I thought that's. I mean, much of the book, obviously the format of the book itself. Obviously, the introduction is John Willett. He obviously did the forward for you, didn't he, for the book?
Well, John Willett wrote the forward for the original book, and then of course it was reproduced in the Clark Art Deluxe. Yes. You know, expanded book, you know, coffee table book, and it's a fabulous forward, you know, introduction because of course, apart from the fact he was one of the country's top intellectuals, authority on Bertolt Brecht and German expressionism and real intellectual. Apart from that, he was a seasoned Manchester Guardian journalist, but above all, he walked the ground. He was there at the time.
Yeah, of course. He had obviously he was good friends with Alan Lowndes and obviously Nicholas Horsfield, as you say. Did they stay in Dieppe, I think, as well? I think they stayed there, didn't they, in Dieppe together, I think.
Well, yes, of course. I mean, Adrian Henry went there, the Liverpool pop painter poet. I mean, they all went there for holidays. A lovely big house. I went there.
Oh, right, okay, I didn't know that.
You know, not to stay, but I went there a couple of times to visit.
Right, okay.
And I mean, it's a wonderful old, great big Norman house outside Dieppe, and they all went there for holidays. So, you know, it was all wheels within wheels.
It is a synonymous place, Dieppe. I mean, I've actually got a book, I think, on Dieppe. I think Sickert went there as well, didn't he? I think it's sort of a lot of artists.
Well, Sickert was there, you know, at the turn of the 20th century. He was there about 1905, 6, something like that. You know, the Edwardian period.
Yes, of course. When I actually visited, I went to see the family of Nicholas Horsfield a few years ago. I managed to sort of speak to them, and it was so surreal. I think it was I can't remember. It might have actually been just before I met you, and they were showing me some of the old photographs of obviously the you know, the family and everything, and suddenly a photograph appeared in front of me, and it was the one that was actually in your Northern School book, where it was the gang of them with Alan Lowndes and Horsfield and it was just and John Willett. It was like bloody. So I was just retracing your steps, thinking Peter must have been sat here and done exactly the same thing, and sort of obviously thought, well, that picture will go in the book, and obviously eventually it did. It was just a nice sort of thought, you know, nice.
Well, they were having a ball. I mean, they were all on holiday, their families, their children. I mean, they were just it was like idyllic. You know, they were under some big tree in the summer, and it was glorious weather, and they were just having an outdoor picnic, and it was just idyllic, really. They must have had some fantastic get-togethers there,
One artist you've not touched on yet is Emmanuel Levy. Didn't he live in London? Did you have connections with him as well through?
Well, yeah, I did, and of course I went to see Emmanuel Levy for exactly the same reason I went to see these other people that I'd been pointed in his direction, by John Willett, who, by the way, lived just up the hill. He lived at the top end of Haverstock Hill, right? In Hampstead Village, and Emmanuel Levy lived halfway down at Belsize Park, just, down the same road, Haverstock Hill. Yeah. So he was down at Belsize Park, which is further down the hill, and Willett was at the top there.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And
so I went to see Emmanuel Levy.
He painted you, Levy, didn't you? I think as well.
Well, he painted the portrait of me. Yeah. Which I've still got, thank God. Yeah. And it was the last picture he ever painted, because he was very old, and he died a couple of months later. He was on his last legs. Right. Okay. And he seemed pretty housebound and miserable, but he opened up to me because it brought back the old days. Yeah. And he was still coherent. Yeah. And I said, well, will you paint my portrait? So he said he would if I went down to the Royal Free Hospital where there was an art shop. Right. And he said, if you go and buy the paints and brushes and the canvas and bring it back, I'll do it. Right, amazing. So very underrated paint, I think. Very good. He was quiet, Manny. He didn't really push himself in a way, He was sort of quiet in a way. It was a funny thing. This sort of your book in particular. It's one of those books as well that you just dip into it. It's like a lot of art books. You can just dip into certain bits of it and extract something. Look at the index. Look for a particular artist at the back, and then go to that artist and read a little snippet about them. And a few years ago, I'm not sure, maybe 5-6 years ago, something like that. It was. I've been offered a painting by somebody. I think I probably told you this story. I've been offered a painting by Emmanuel Levy, a sort of 3/4 length portrait of a man. So I saw the image of it. Obviously, somebody emailed it to me, and I thought, well, that's it was a really striking sort of portrait of this guy with round sort of glasses on. And I thought that that's a really sort of decent looking portrait. And then I was reading your book and reading about Emmanuel Levy and everything, and suddenly this portrait sort of was mentioned in the book. It's not illustrated. It wasn't in the first one anyway. And it said that apparently Emmanuel Levy painted Nicholas Horsfield, and that this painting was called Man in a, I think it was Ginger Coat. And as soon as I heard, I thought it was literally like my eyes were open, because this painting that I'd been offered was not stated as being a portrait of Nicholas Horsfield. But when I looked at it again, I could clearly tell it was Nicholas Horsfield. I didn't even think it was the first time I sort of saw it, and then realised that this is the missing painting I was sort of being offered. It was Nicky Horsfield. Yeah. It was called Man in a Ginger Coat.
Yes, and it's a stunning picture. It's a stunning painting.
No, it's definitely Nicholas Horsfield. He talked about it.
Yeah, incredible.
He talked to me about it, and you got it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's very nice.
And it's of course in the reprint. It's in the
then of course, book. Subsequently, because of our connections afterwards, which we can talk about that a bit later, but our connections later on, it did it's nice, some of the images that went into the second book, sort of, and some of the things that I could chucked at you as well and sent it down to your design, and we managed to get them in the book, which was very nice. Just to go on to the structure of the actual book itself, the way it's sort of it's very sort of structured in the sense that you must have spent an awful lot of time. Obviously, the first instance, we may as well talk about the Liverpool sort of element of it, and sort of how what you did to sort of research the Liverpool sort of angle of the book. Who was involved with that? Was that Horsfield and Willett and people like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And it's the same people, Horsfield, Willett. They pointed me towards Adrian Henry and George Jardine and. Absolutely.
Was Arthur Ballard around then?
Arthur Ballard, of course, yeah. Yes, I went to see him a couple of times. Mm-hmm. I drove to North Wales to see him with June Furlong, the life drawing model, and George Jardine. We drove there and saw him 2 consecutive Wednesdays in 1990. But he was on the verge of developing Alzheimer's.
Right. Okay.
So I just caught him in time, if you like. Mm-hmm. But he lent me his big archive, which enabled me to do the book on him.
Right. Oh yeah, of course. That was a subsequent book, wasn't it? That was the
it was a subsequent
that was like the
book,
sort of spin-off book of one of the spin-off books that you did. Well, actually, after the Northern School book, you went on to do the Liverpool Scene book, didn't you? I think.
Well, I did a book in 1992 called Liverpool Scene, and obviously Ballard was in that, obviously.
Yes.
But I also did a book just on him 4 years later in 1996.
Yes, I've got that one.
And then, of course, he's in the Northern School as well, because I treated Liverpool and Manchester kind of as, very different but complementary northern cities.
Yeah. Okay.
So there was obviously, but the thing about Willett's view on it, and Horsfield's view on it, they saw Liverpool and Manchester as neighbouring, but strangely irreconcilable.
Okay.
The one had strengths that the other didn't have. They complemented each other.
Mm-hmm.
They were different.
Yeah.
Liverpool was more outward-looking, being a port. It was perhaps more avant-garde. It embraced abstraction more. It got into trendy things like pop art. It entered a dialogue with New York more. The whole transatlantic connection. John Lennon and New York, and they looked at abstract art in Paris. Ballard certainly did. Horsfield did. The holidays in France. Whereas the Manchester artists were more, they were sort of more
insular, weren't they?
They were tied in with the local industrial realism. They were.
Well, they had Larry, didn't they? That's the thing as well.
Well, Larry was a bigger artist than Liverpool ever produced, of course.
Of course. I remember you telling me about that. When you told me that one thing there about that Liverpool was far more sort of outward looking. You told me a few years ago, and it kind of opened my eyes, and I thought, you're so right about that. That is so true. And they did move through these sort of various periods of what was cool and what was trendy, and like you say, pop art and things were very sort of influential. But Manchester, which we will get on to, obviously, talking about Manchester in a minute, but in particular, the artists were sort of, I think a lot of the local press, it seemed to drill into them constantly, to be painting what you can see and what is around you and what you experience all the time. And so I think that's what they did. They did sort of seem to paint a lot more what was around them, the immediacy, and the sort of post-industrial sort of landscape sort of crept up from that, really, in a lot of the images.
Yes, I mean, it's a very complex mix, really, Manchester and Liverpool, because they're so different to each other and they're rivals as well.
Yeah.
But I would say that it's swung back to Manchester's way now, because there's more money in Manchester. It can hold 6 or 7 good galleries, which Liverpool can't. It's always been a bit weak on. There are 1 or 2 good galleries in Liverpool, like Editions, a print gallery I've recently been involved with. But generally, it's not been good for the art market in Liverpool. It's good on museums, of course, but not on commercial.
Yeah, the museums are unbelievable. I mean,
they're unbelievable. But as regards to the art market for contemporary artists, Liverpool's not good. Whereas Manchester's much better. They had the Crane Calman Gallery in the old days. They've got some good galleries.
Well, they've got the
Manchester
Cheshire
now,
as well.
Art.
There's a lot, in the sort of in Cheshire and sort of around the area.
Oh yeah, there's no question that Manchester's now gone back into pole position now. There's more painters around Manchester. They're not seduced by short-lived trendyisms. It's a more solid, grounded type of painting culture, if you like.
Okay.
But there is no doubt that back in the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s, Liverpool's had a more avant-garde edge to it.
I mean, Don McKinley was another one, wasn't he? He was an amazing painter, another...
Exactly.
Some terrific painters. So, with regards to the, obviously, with the Liverpool sort of side of it we talked about, a lot of the Manchester side of it, you do focus, quite a portion of the book focuses on the Manchester Academy, and sort of through the various periods of that. I think that's quite a lot of the spine of the book, where you're talking about different sort of periods of the Manchester Academy and the shows that have run through years and years, and you're obviously looking at various reviews of the shows in the Manchester Guardian and things like that. So how did that come about? Where did your research start for that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, actually, because, I mean, that's another essential strand in all this. With Valerie Lowndes, I got to know Julian Spalding.
Okay.
But again, the Julian Spalding connection came more through St. Ives than it did from strictly the north, the northern school, because Frances Spalding, Julian's then wife, reviewed my first ever book on St. Ives, because she reviewed the big St. Ives show at Tate Gallery in London in 1985. Mm-hmm. She reviewed it because it was the big event in the mid-80s, and St. Ives was being rediscovered. Mm-hmm. And because I'd written this short first ever book on St. Ives, she reviewed it.
Right, okay, I see.
So she invited me up to talk on St. Ives at Sheffield Polytechnic, where she taught, where she was teaching. Mm-hmm. Because Julian, her husband, was then director of the Graves Art Gallery in Sheffield. So again, it's this kind of complex interweaving between St. Ives and the north.
Right, okay.
Yeah? So anyway, through Spalding, he moved over to Manchester City Art Gallery. He got a job as director of Manchester City Art Gallery after Sheffield. Mm-hmm. Right? He got promoted, yeah?
Yeah.
So I then already knew Julian Spalding from Sheffield and from St. Ives and everything.
Yeah. And it was around the sort of time that you were researching. This all happened around the time of the research that you was doing.
Exactly,
it all landed, fell in your lap, didn't it?
Yeah, so what happened, because Valerie Lowndes had moved back from Gloucestershire, the Cotswolds, she moved back to a native Sheffield.
Yeah.
Well, the Spaldings lived in Sheffield then. So I took Valerie Lowndes to meet, the Spaldings. We had an evening with them, cheese and wine. So I was repaying them by introducing them to somebody that they were very interested in. So it was symbiotic,
Yeah.
And then, of course, Julian said about this big archive at Manchester City Art Gallery of the Manchester Academy of Fine Art.
Yeah.
The history of it.
Of course. Yeah.
So it was through that social connection that I was alerted to the fact that there was this huge untouched archive on 150 years of the Manchester Academy. It was just a gift horse.
Yeah. That's never been.
Hardly anybody had ever looked at it. It was just a gift horse.
Yeah, of course, and it's massive.
So I just went in there, starry-eyed, and then I started researching on it in late 1987.
Perfect. Yeah, well done.
And again, this serendipity between St. Ives and the north. Yeah. I met a guy in St. Ives on holiday down there, Alex Simpson, who lives in Kidsgrove.
Right.
On the edge of Stoke.
Yeah.
And then I used to stay with him a lot. Mm-hmm. And we went to have lunch with Harold Wiley in 1988.
Right, okay.
I went with Alex Simpson to have lunch with Harold Wiley. We had a lovely Italian meal. I remember his Persian wife cooked for us. Yeah. Well, it's the only time I've met Harold Wiley.
Right. Perfect.
And, I interviewed him, and he had a chapter in my first Northern School book.
Yeah.
But again, Alex Simpson, who I'd met in St. Ives, he then became my crash site, my crash,
where
I crashed out, Mm-hmm. So I would stay with him in Kidsgrove with wonderful views of the Cheshire Plain.
Yeah.
And then I'd get a train into Manchester, Victoria, and then I'd spend the day researching outside Julian Spalding's office. In the corridor outside his office. And, he used to come out past me, down the corridor, and I was there, researching and everything. Mm-hmm. So it was all kind of serendipity and kind of chance, happenings, and it was fantastic, really.
Yeah, well done. You did.
It was absolutely brilliant. So I just mechanically went through the archive. It took me a long time. Many visits.
Yes,
I don't know exactly. Maybe up to a year it took me to research it all.
Wow.
So I had a huge amount of notes and quotes and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. So I was able to start writing the history of the Manchester Academy.
That was a big spine of. That was quite the main sort of spine of the book. I think a lot of it sort of, and it was good because you used so many quotes from, like you say, from the Manchester Guardian and sort of. What was going on, and you mentioned there was so many artists who'd probably not had the name in print ever, was suddenly sort of mentioned in this book, and obviously in your book because of it. So during your research, you must have come across the Midday Studios then. Did you know of the Midday Studios prior to this, or was it sort of the first time you were were you seeing it mentioned quite a lot in the archive material?
I didn't know about it myself. No, right. I mean, I never met Margot Ingham.
Yes.
Which is a pity, because she was a very, vibrant, charismatic, attractive lady. And
well, she died. I think she died in the late 70s. Just for people who don't know, the Midday Studios is an art gallery that popped up in Manchester, sort of post Second World War. I think it's 1946 to 51. I think sort of post war. It was established by Margot Ingham and Ned Owens. A very sort of like a salon sort of feel about it, and then of course never really been talked about since. I know Colin Jellicoe, the art dealer in Manchester, had good connections with Margot, and then obviously Peter came across the archive of the Midday. Is that right, in the gallery?
Yes.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a pity I missed Margot, because she died of cancer in 1981.
Right. Is that right? 81.
And she was a powerhouse, really. She was, really made things happen. Entrepreneur.
Yes.
Wonderful, really. And but I spoke to a lot of people who knew her.
Okay.
So I had direct, very personal sort of recollections about her. I mean, Sven Berlin, the former St. Ives artist.
Yes.
He knew Margot Ingham. He met her in St. Ives. I mean, again, this serendipity and overlap between St. Ives and the North.
He might have had a show at the Midday, actually. I think. Did he have a show there?
He did. Yeah. He did have a show.
Yeah.
And Sven wrote letters to me about Margot Ingham, so I got filled in by people like that. Mm-hmm. Nicky Horsfield knew her, so I got first-hand, very intimate reminiscences about Margot. And, it's just a shame I never met her. I just missed her.
Yes.
But I researched the Midday Studios, and again, plenty of archive material. In fact, actually, there's really scope for a book on Margot Ingham Midday Studios.
I think there is. Yeah.
I mean, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
There's real scope there. In fact, I think somebody was going to.
Right. Okay.
But I don't think it ever quite took off. But certainly it's being talked about. But there's a real scope there.
It's a great chapter in your book. That it's probably one of my favourite chapters in the book, to be honest.
Well, yeah, exactly, because it's such a rich. It was a salon. It was underground. It was dead bang opposite Manchester City Art Gallery. So it became a kind of salon de refusee. They put on alternative exhibitions for rejects from the main Manchester Academy show. Mm-hmm. And Lowry used to go in there, whenever he went into town.
It was, yeah.
It was just a wonderful place, really.
Yeah. Very good.
I mean, they talk about the cavern, with the Beatles and music in Liverpool, but the Midday Studios was the fine art equivalent of the cavern. It was and so.
Yeah, it ran for such a sort of, only 5 years, and then obviously Margot did other things after that. And then, of course, our friend, our mutual friend who sadly died a couple of years ago, Colin Jellicoe, sort of Margot saw Colin as her sort of kind of a bit of a natural successor in the way that he was sort of initially doing his sort of the way he worked.
Exactly.
And then that's what happened. So that's that chapter. And then what happens at the sort of at the end of the sort of initial book, the first book, you have these sort of subsequent chapters about with artists you must have known and met at the time. These individual chapters.
I did. That's right. I did individual chapters on Alan Lowndes, on Harold Riley and William Turner.
Yeah, so obviously you met Harold Riley. Did you know Bill Turner? Did you know him then? I guess you met Bill.
Well, William Turner, I used to stay with him.
Right. Okay.
I mean, he lived in Cheadle Hulme, and then he moved to Congleton, and I used to stay with him a lot. I mean, I used to knock around with him actually.
Oh, right. Well, there you go.
I knew William Turner very well. I used to stay with him, as I say. And I remember in the first Saturday in 1990, we had a big Northern School book launch exhibition at the Grundy Museum and Art Gallery in Blackpool.
Right, okay.
And we drove up there it was a Saturday lunchtime opening, and Julian Spalding's deputy, Julian Troyhertz, who was a Mancunian, he lived in Macclesfield, but he was Mancunian, and he ended up as director of the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool. Wow. And he went to the same university as me, Norwich. We didn't know each other when we were students there, but he was there at the same time as me.
Oh, there you go.
So it's all wheels within wheels. Yeah. But anyway, he opened the show. He gave a speech, an open show. It was another book launch for my Northern School book, and it was packed. It was a cold, white January morning in 1990, the first Saturday in 1990, and I went with Bill Turner, went in. And Valerie Lowndes came in. She travelled there separately, and she came in, and she had the biggest smile on her face you could imagine. She was it was packed. It was packed with people.
Brilliant.
And it just showed the instant success and popularity of my Northern School book.
It was amazing.
And the way people were, the Northern warmth, the pride, people waving the flag. It's still there. You can still see it in the Manchester art scene,
Yeah. Oh.
It was absolutely wonderful,
That's right. The other artist, Ian Grant, I think he has a chapter. He's somebody you don't hear that much of, really. Scottish, I think Scottish was it. But obviously had associations with the Midday, knew Margot, didn't she?
He knew Margot very well. I mean, Ian Grant is another kingpin, actually. Yes. Yeah. He's a bit intellectual in a way, like Horsfield and Willett. Right. I mean, Ian Grant was another. He knew a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
He really knew a lot of people, and because he was elderly, he was older than most of the others when I first met him. His memory went right back,
right.
To the interwar period.
Right.
He could remember some of the really early Manchester artists. He was important. He was very important, and. Through Ian Grant, I made some very important contacts, like the collector Bob Sim in London.
Right, okay.
He was from Manchester, Bob Sim, and he was UK chairman of KPMG. And he became a very close friend, and he supported me, and I used to buy art for him, and, I'd make commissions off him. He sort of kept me afloat in a way.
Right.
And he sponsored my Liverpool scene book in 1992.
Wow.
But that was all through Ian Grant.
That's incredible, yeah.
The thing about Ian Grant, he was a tutor at Manchester School of Art.
That's right.
And he was old school, but he was a bit pedestrian and conventional as a painter. It wasn't, very good. I mean, superb. But a little bit staid, if you like.
Yeah, okay.
Academic, if you like, which is that's not meant as a criticism, but it just meant that he wasn't...
it wasn't groundbreaking, was it?
His work, it sort of become a little bit... a little bit obscure or not quite, sexy enough if you know what I mean. It just doesn't have the sort of popular appeal enough. It's very sound drawing and craftsmanship, but so one doesn't hear as much about him these days.
No, I think I've got a drawing. I did have an oil of his, but I think I've got maybe a drawing of his, I think, somewhere. Now. And then of course the other painter that he's mentioned, who is sort of we could probably do an episode talking about this guy, but Theodore Major is the other guy who obviously you met, didn't you? We did touch on talking about him a bit earlier on, but he again is somebody that you did meet, didn't you?
I met Theodore probably 10 times.
Right. Okay.
9, 10, 11 times. I mean, I first went to see him in 1985, definitely 1985.
Yeah.
And then for the next, 4 or 5 years, I used to visit him quite regularly. I used to go with Alex Simpson, my friend from Kidsgrove, or I'd walk from Skelmersdale because it's only 3 miles from Apley Bridge. And he was quite crusty. I mean, he was very nice when I first met him because he saw me as a sort of innocent student. But when he realised I was up to promoting him and I was starting to, get thigh deep in the politics of art, I was doing a book, then he started to, treat me with more suspicion.
Yeah, of course.
And
stories about
and then in the end, he shouted me out of the house and accused me of, popularising him and being responsible for bringing greedy dealers there to trying to get a bargain off him.
After the book came out, was that after the book?
after the book, he blamed me. Rather than thank me for the book, he shouted at me and said, "You're not coming in here because you brought all these greedy dealers here, and it's your fault."
Yeah,
It was my book.
Yeah, if you look back at Theodore and sort of Lowry, they were kind of like they were kind of neck and neck, in the sort of stakes. They were both the big sort of Northern artists, weren't they? Really?
Oh yeah.
For many years.
They were the big two.
Yeah, the big two.
Lowry obviously was number one.
Yeah.
But Theodore was a number two. No question.
Yeah, that's true.
No question about it. But by the time I knew him, he was obviously getting very old. But he had become quite cranky. I mean, he was temperamental, moody. And he was very nice the first visit. He was quite quite gentle, and But then he started to get embattled and. In fact, he shouted me out once, and he, threw me out of his house, and all sorts,
There is a book being done, isn't there, on him at the moment, I believe.
Michael Howard's doing it, who did the big book on Lowry.
That's right, yeah. So that's sort of, I don't know when that might be out. It might be, I'd assume, probably next year, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think next year,
and then, of course, the other sort of individual chapters, there is one on an artist called Kenneth Gribble, and that's somebody that you don't really hear mentioned very often.
Well, I mean, Ken Gribble...
Was he from Birmingham, was he from?
No, he was from Manchester.
Oh, right, okay, fair enough.
But he lived in Sidmouth in Devon.
Right, okay, right.
And I picked him up through a very influential exhibition, which was called Lancashire South of the Sands. Right. It was an extremely influential exhibition on me, and I should mention that because there was a big review in the Daily Telegraph, and the show was at the Harris Museum in Preston, and it travelled around the Lancashire museums. It was organised by the Lancashire museums, and it influenced me tremendously because it introduced the work of Roger Hampson to me, all sorts of people, the Theodore Major, the whole lot. Right. And it was more about the industrial landscape of Lancashire in art, Right. And I went to see it in Preston, and I reviewed it actually for Arts Review, for Arts Review magazine. I reviewed it. Right, okay. So that was a big influence on me, the Lancashire South of the Sands, and
that's how you need Kenneth Gribble.
So Kenneth Gribble had been covered in that. And I went to see him in Sidmouth and stayed the night and got on very well with him. And he was from Ashton under Lyne. Right. And he was a Manchester Academy exhibitor. And so I put him in the book,
Fair enough. Fair enough. You don't sort of hear him, really. You don't sort of... His work, it's not that you don't hear him. His works don't tend to come up for auction even. I don't think you sort of see too many sort of on the market as such.
He's obscure now, but he was a good painter, and he was a very interesting guy. Yeah. And as I say, I went to see him in Devon, and he was very helpful to me and told me a lot, about the Manchester scene in those days.
And then the last sort of guy that you mentioned, that's mentioned in the book as a chapter, is Roger Hampson as well. You just mentioned briefly then. I guess Roger was quite a good sort of person to know as well, because obviously his links with the Manchester Academy, because he was the president, wasn't he?
Oh yeah. Well, again, it was serendipity because when I started working on a northern school in late 1987, I had a girlfriend in Brecon called Pat Evans, a school teacher in Brecon. Well, I had myself been to school in the 60s, and of course Roger Hampson lived about 25 miles away in Hereford. Right, okay. Which is only 25 miles or something. Right. He retired in Hereford. Right. Because I think a guy called Kenneth Craddock had been influential on him in Bolton. He was from Bolton. And a lot of his work's about Lee, isn't it? Lee and around Bolton area. Yeah. And Tinsley, is it? Tinsley, I think. Yeah, Dillesley, I'd say. And But of course, as far as I was concerned, he was dead. He was easy prey because he was in Hereford, and I used to go up to Brecon for long weekends with Pat. Because I was living in London then, but I used to go down to Brecon, to see Pat, and we'd go over and see Roger to drive over.
Yeah.
We'd go and have a meal with them, and I was interviewing them and all sorts. So again, it was kind of serendipity,
That works out well. I mean, I do like Roger Hampson's work. I think his prints in particular, his lino, and his also his mono prints that he produced as well. I've got a few of his mono prints. I think they're stunning. I really sort of rate them, and his little, and some of his little sort of vignette oils, he's with the sort of small pieces and things. I think they're sort of really nice.
They're brilliant, aren't they?
Yeah, he's very good painter, very good.
They're absolutely brilliant. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I agree.
And then that sort of concludes the sort of crux of the first book. And then what happened was, this is how I first sort of met Peter. I don't even know. I can't even remember the years. About 5 years ago, something like that. I think it was. I was at an exhibition.
I met you,
in Stoke. In Stoke, wasn't it? It was at the Arthur Berry exhibition. I'm a massive fan of Arthur Berry, as you know, and so it was a joint exhibition that had been organised. Arthur Berry and L.S. Lowry. L.S. Lowry is a huge name, and Arthur Berry, of course, who was sort of a fan of Lowry, if you like, and sort of they put this exhibition on a few years ago. And I was there with Colin Jellicoe, our friend. And walking around in this sort of exhibition, having a look round, and suddenly caught this guy out of the corner of my eye, and I recognised from the photographs that I'd seen in his books, and sort of went up and approached you and said, "Excuse me, are you Peter Davies?" And you were like, "Well, yeah." and then sort of the rest was history, really, because then of course I'd sort of bent your ear for the rest of the show, and then subsequently you ended up getting a lift back to Manchester with me, didn't you?
That's right. Yeah. That was a good night. That
it was a good night. But with regards to that, one of the reasons that you were there, I think probably the main reason, I suppose, is because you then told me that that you would be working the Northern School book. You were doing a revised version of it, which had been commissioned, of course, by Bill Clark at Clark Arts. This was going to be a sort of a more sort of deluxe book, coffee table size book, all beautifully illustrated, and you're going to expand on the original book. Is that sort of how it sort of transpired, I suppose?
Yeah, that's right. That's more or less it. I was there because Bill Clark had put on the Arthur Berry and Lowry show in the Stoke Gallery Museum, and I was there for that, and then I met you and Colin Jellicoe there that night.
That's right. Did Bill sort of approach you? How did Bill approach you to do the book then, to sort of revisit it after all these years?
Oh dear. We went for lunch in Brown's in Old Bond Street. I remember that.
Very nice.
He had an office in the West End then.
Right.
And I think I suggested it or something. And
Bill's always sort of said he's a fan of that book. It was one sort of thing that he's quoted as saying that, isn't it, quite a lot? That he was sort of.
Well, it's more than a fan. I mean, it influenced him to become an art dealer.
Well, there you go.
And you jumped at it. I mean, I think technically I put it to him, but having said that, he jumped at it. I mean, he didn't need any persuading at all. Yeah. And we had lunch in Brown's Hotel in Bond Street it was April 2015. 2014. April 2014 it was. And so I had about 18 months then, exactly 18 months to update it and expand it and rewrite some of it to make it a substantially more comprehensive book than the first one.
Yes. And that's what you did. I mean, the first one at that point as well. I mean, it still is sort of a bit like that as well. But the first book certainly, because I think it was quite. I don't know what the print run on the first book was, but it became sort of this book that everybody in the North sort of wanted to have. And so they started to go for quite a big money on when they, on Amazon or eBay whenever they appeared. They would go for quite a lot of money. So there was definitely a call for another version to be made or reprinted or whatever. And then subsequently you made the expanded book, which I think what's nice about the second book is there are a number of artists that sort of now, over time, possibly would have been in the first book, but obviously, now definitely are in the second book. And then subsequently, these additions as well that you've added to the end of the book. Some new artists, some younger artists that have come to prominence since the book. But then obviously people like Geoffrey Key's mentioned in this book, isn't he? And obviously Colin Jellicoe and various other things have have happened. So it's a nice thing to do the book.
Yeah, Liam Spencer and Ben Kelly, and there's a whole bunch of them. Younger ones that are now in the bigger book.
Yes,
and it brings it up to date and and everything. But the big deluxe book is about to go out of print.
Oh, there you go.
So that's going the way of the first book. So that's going to become expensive as well.
There you go. You might do another one in a few years.
Well, I mean, who knows? I mean, I think, it depends. I mean, it could well be that there's enough material that comes to light in the next, 10 years, say 5-10 years, where there's scope to do yet another, or maybe a reprint of the reprint, but where it actually has an extra chapter at the end.
Yes, of course.
To develop it even further into the. So I think that's a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I love that the second book. Obviously, again, I just mentioned like Geoffrey Key, but obviously people like Trevor Grimshaw mentioned more in it, and Reg Gardner and people like that. Sort of.
Exactly.
You did sort of. There were other sort of strands that were put into the book, which is it's all good. And
absolutely,
sort of it was a nice, and then of course the launch was a very good launch. You at the time you sort of enjoyed that, didn't you? It was a big show, that wasn't it?
Fantastic. Yeah,
I remember that well. It was a good night actually.
Yeah, it was a very good night. Yeah.
And so that sort of it rounds it up, I think, with regards to the Nolan School. But currently, at the moment, as we know. And it has been sort of announced, I think, as well, in a few other places. You're currently working on a book on the Stoke artist Arthur Berry, which is, again, linked into the show that we were at a few years ago where we met. And that's a kind of a spin-off almost of the Northern School book, isn't it? It's probably one of the spin-offs that you've had from that.
Yeah, it's a spin-off. And there haven't been many spin-offs in terms of monographs, but this is one.
Yeah.
And it's not a big monograph, but it's a good one.
Yeah.
And it's linked to a major show at the Brampton Museum in Newcastle-under-Lyme.
That'll be next year, that won't it, I think.
Which is next January.
The world being back to normal, hopefully.
Oh, yeah, because, I mean, thank God it has been put back.
Yeah.
Because it means that it'll be, it won't be sort of...
It's pressurised, isn't it? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll work. I'm looking forward to that. Obviously, I'm a massive fan of Berry, so I'm very.
Well, you're writing the forward.
I'm doing the forward as well. That's right.
Yeah.
So it'll be good.
Which is really good. Yeah.
Right. Okay, Pete. I'm going to go. Thank you very much for talking to me. It's been on the phone as well. This interview, by the way. We were probably planning to do it face to face, but obviously circumstances have sort of gone against us. But I think it went well. Nice to speak to you as always, and I will catch up with you soon. And take care.
Yeah, we'll speak soon, Ed.
All right, mate. Okay, mate.
Okay, thanks, Ed.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the episode today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please check out the Northern Art Facebook page, which is facebook.com/the Northern Art page. And also, we've recently set up an Instagram account, which you can check out as well. That's also the Northern Art page on Instagram. Please like, comment, share, message me, whatever you want to do. It's much appreciated. And we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.